Maine couldn't fathom why Zero had turned out this way. Perhaps it was the memory she acquired from the king of Wolfhart and Garcia. Slowly approaching Maine, Zero explained that the church was originally founded by the Federation. What the old pope did was merely to provide the witches an opportunity to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. She told Maine that if he were to win, he could gain the memories Zero had accumulated over 200 years. Maine thought to himself, the decision to let Zero activate the secret room was strange from the beginning. Despite being favored by Oberlin, she was just a witch, and shouldn't have access to the church's deepest secrets. Remembering when Zero had unlocked the room, and she said this was also her first time here. Pieces was coming together. Unfortunately, Maine had overlooked this. Maine asked Zero where she would lead the church if she won. She tilted her head upwards and responded, towards victory, or perhaps defeat, but certainly not flee to the fjord. Zero was already privy to the secret orders Maine had issued. As the Third Divine War approaches, Maine diverted some resources to secure an escape route for himself. A hint of sarcasm laced Zero's tone. The Divine War hasn't even started, and Maine have already lost faith in victory. How can someone like Maine be the spokesperson for the gods? Maine couldn't hold back his fury, and started screaming, if the gods truly favored them, why have they allowed humanity to suffer defeat time and time again? Maine then laughed, to fight against the demons, they can only rely on God's punishment army. But with their current numbers, they can't change the outcome. Should he rely on the witches? Zero drew her long sword, pointing it at Maine. She shook her head, the glint in her eyes sending a chill down Maine's spine. Zero knew that this battle would determine the fate of humanity. Regardless of gender or age, everyone would become valiant warriors, rushing to the battlefield in waves, until they either defeated the demons or met their collective end. Maine found this plan utterly ridiculous. Ordinary people would be paralyzed with fear at the mere sight of a demonic beast. How could they possibly combat the demon? Zero didn't respond, prompting a sudden realization in Maine. The only way to grant ordinary people the ability to fight was... He can't believe it. Zero intend for everyone to consume the church's pill. Zero replied, they can rely on sheer numbers. In 5 years, they will have stockpiled 4 million pills. Apart from the God's punishment army, the Pure Ones, Knights, and Judgment army, they will have millions of additional forces. Maine was convinced Zero had lost her mind. How could an Pure One nurtured by the church ever suggest such a thing? He believed that the memories inside Zero's head must have backfired. Zero took deliberate steps toward Maine, believing that acquiring knowledge was inherently a process of self-transformation. She had no intention of continuing their conversation. It was time to decide who would rule over the church. Maine fired the crossbow he held in his hand. Zero effortlessly dodged, following it up with a swift sword strike. Gritting his teeth, Maine watched Zero intently. Suddenly, a billowing red mist began to emerge from beneath him, spreading in all directions. Zero paused, her eyes widening slightly. Then, clutching her throat, she let out a harrowing scream. Standing within the red mist, Maine introduced this was the demon mist. Lethal only to witches. If he were to fill the entire square with it, Zero would die again and again. Zero laughed. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind surged, whisking away the red mist surrounding Maine. He recognized the wind magic stone set into Zero's ring. Without hesitation, Maine produced and swallowed a batch of pills. Zero nodded approvingly, deeming it a wise choice. Maine felt a rapid surge of power coursing through him. Meanwhile, Zero began forging her weapon. The blade was as broad as her own body, embedded with numerous magic stones. It felt eerily familiar. Indeed, it was the weapon of Acarus. The magic stones on the blade lit up one by one, followed by a blinding golden light emanating from its edge. The light dispersed the surrounding red mist. Maine saw nothing but consuming golden light. In an instant, the entire world seemed to crumble and dissolve within this golden glow. Back in the dungeon, Zero casually threw her draped cloak onto the ground. The Judgment Knight standing by respectfully bowed his head, presenting Main's golden robe to her, a garment symbolizing the pinnacle of church power. He then knelt, proclaiming welcoming their new pope. Ferlin and his father arrived to the border town to meet with Roland. They were invited in the dining hall. Due to the heavy snow outside, both Ferlin and his father were clad in thick coats. Upon entering, they immediately felt the warmth of the room. Roland suggested they remove their coats, explaining the indoor warmth was due to central heating, a concept foreign to the father and son. He briefly explained what central heating was. The primary reason for their visit was to meet Agatha. Roland advised Ferlin's father to remove the Stone of God punishment as a basic courtesy towards Agatha. Shortly after, Agatha, draped in her snowy cloak, entered the dining hall. Pushing open the grand doors, she hesitated for a moment before speaking. The divine war is upon them. She needs to use every available moment to produce weapons. She brushed the snow off her cloak. Perhaps due to working closely with the chief alchemist, her tone carried a hint of Kyle's mannerisms. Roland inquired if Agatha remembered, some 400 years ago when Takara was on the brink of destruction, a group of her servants separated from her, following the others to the mountains. Agatha thought for a moment. The memory seemed vague, but she couldn't fathom why it was being brought up after so long. As she removed her snow-covered hood, revealing her blue hair and face, both Ferlin and his father gasped in unison. They immediately knelt on one knee before her. Ferlin's father proclaimed he was a descendant of Kaga, and asked if Agatha recalled the name. In her time, Agatha had two main attendants, Kaf, who served as her guard captain, and Kaga, her chief housekeeper. Her expression turned frosty as she mentioned Kaga, asking if they were descendants of the very housekeeper who sneaked away with the magic stone and experimental records? Ferlin's father's eyes widened, and just as he was about to explain, Agatha's expression darkened, urging them to leave immediately. She claimed she no longer wished to see them. Without waiting for a response, the witch swiftly left the hall, not even allowing the pair an opportunity to explain themselves. Roland, puzzled, turned to Nightingale, seeking her insight. Whispering into his ear, Nightingale mentioned that both parties were indeed telling the truth. Roland contemplated this for a moment, and he quickly summarized the situation. Perhaps there is a misunderstanding. He suggested to Ferlin's father to reside in Ferlin's house for the time being and take the opportunity to explore the town. He promised to discuss the matter further with Agatha. Trembling from head to toe, Ferlin's father gratefully thanked Roland. It was evident to Roland that Agatha's reaction had deeply shaken the noble. Roland then advised them to bring in the magical stones and the records they had in their possession. Seeing the remnants from over 4 centuries ago might alleviate Agatha's feelings, he mused, hopeful that their material proof could bridge the chasm of misunderstanding that had formed. In the evening, the prince summoned Agatha to his office. Roland recounted the story he'd been told to Agatha, informing her that regardless of how her housekeeper had acted, Ferlin and his father's intention had at least been to return things to their rightful owner. Perhaps he had even hoped to atone for the responsibilities their ancestors had shirked. Agatha remarked that Kaga had merely deceived his descendants, and they owed her nothing. Besides, weren't they among the nobility of the Western Territory? If Agatha were to accept them, it would only hinder Roland in his future plans and expansions. Agatha understood Roland's ambition to bring the entire Western Territory under his control. Roland hadn't expected her to think this, yet from her tone, it didn't seem like she held it against Ferlin and his father. Gently touching her hair, Agatha decided not to carry the anger from 4 centuries ago toward the present descendants. Roland was even more moved by the enlightened witch before him. He then jokingly inquired if Agatha would be interested in her inheritance. Shooting Roland a sharp glance, Agatha replied that it wasn't her inheritance but that of the Exploration Society. Tilly opened the first box. Out of 10 boxes, each was filled with magical stones. Agatha referred to them as glow stones. Infusing them with magical power, a pale yellow light immediately emanated, rapidly surpassing the brightness of a torch. Only when the light became somewhat blinding did she release her grip. Roland's eyes gleamed as he observed these magical stones. When Anna brought up the topic of the ore veins and the treasure map, it was only then that Agatha remarked, "These are ore veins marked by the Exploration Society, intended for the location of the upcoming holy city." When Roland asked why is the stone in the mine was so tough, Agatha explained. When the god stone is divided, its hardness diminishes dramatically with the reduction in volume, and its area of influence also drastically shrinks. For instance, the easily portable god's punishment stone people often carry can be effortlessly shattered with an iron hammer. Roland then inquired if there were any methods to transform the magical stones. Agatha replied that there weren't. At this point, Tilly recalled seeing a perpetually shining lightstone at the ruins, which had been shining slightly dimmer for 400 years. Agatha mentioned that this would require the collaboration of a dozen or so witches. Some witches can replenish the magical power of others. By infusing it with a substantial amount of magic, it can shine for an extended period. However, these magical stones don't offer much assistance in battle situations. Pointing to the black leather books in some other boxes, Agatha's cheeks turned a rare shade of red. Some of them are copies of the Compendium of All Magic, intended as a guide for the witches who will settle the new lands and teach them how to evolve their abilities. Why would Agatha be embarrassed about that? Roland gave her a puzzled look, continuing his search through the remaining boxes. Sylvie found a secret compartment in one of the boxes. Upon opening it, Anna took out a cast iron square box. Agatha stared at the box in shock, her hand trembling as she looked at the divine seal imprint, unable to believe that Kaga would possess something of this nature. She suspected he might have stolen it from other witches of the Exploration Society. Roland speculated that someone might have been attacked and entrusted it to Kaga. He then inquired about the nature of this divine seal imprint. Agatha responded, certain magical stones, when connected, can produce additional effects, either altering the nature of the magical power or amplifying its outcome. This has been one of the primary research focuses of the Exploration Society. These interconnected magical stones are referred to as seals, and the divine seals are the most powerful among them. Their magical stones are all sourced from high-tier demons. Throughout the entire Takira, there are only 3 or 4 of them. When Roland asked how powerful it was, Agatha calmly responded that it could level Roland's castle to the ground. Agatha commented, "The amount of magic needed to utilize this is staggering." Back then, only the top 2 seats of the Federation could employ the divine seal. Roland pondered for a moment and considered letting Anna give it a try. Agatha shook her head and began explaining why only Transcendents could use it. Almost in the blink of an eye, as Anna took the seal, the 4 magical stones on it lit up one by one. Their golden light grew increasingly bright, making the entire seal resemble a nascent sun. Agatha shouted for Anna to let go. The brilliance vanished in an instant as if it had never appeared. Exhaling deeply, Anna gently placed the seal back into its iron box. A hushed silence enveloped the office. Sylvie covered her eyes trying to recover from the sudden light. Everyone took a moment to catch their breath. Anna commented that using it consumed a great deal of magic. She could at most use it twice. Her statement felt same as saying, "The exam was a bit challenging, I guess I could only score 99% twice." Paper had gradually become familiar with this place. She is surrounded by people who always cherished and cared for her. Without the need to search for food or worry about the firewood she gathered being stolen, she hoped to stay in this warm place forever. As she entered the main hall, Paper noticed the witches were not sitting at the long table for meals as usual. Instead, they were crowding around a wall, chattering incessantly. She blinked in curiosity but felt too shy to ask Wendy what they were up to. Wendy smiled, telling her that everyone is testing their combat strength. Paper was puzzled. Wendy added, "It's a quirky term that His Highness came up with, don't mind it." Lightning infused her magic and lit up 2 stones. Meanwhile, Maisie boasted that she lit up 2.5 stones, which Lightning found hard to believe. Wendy asked Paper if she wanted to give it a try. However, Wendy reminded her that Paper hadn't learned how to properly use her magic yet. Suddenly, Paper felt unwell and collapsed to the ground. A sharp pain racked her abdomen, and she felt as if magic quivered within her body. Wendy recognized these as signs of a magical backlash. She held Paper closely, trying to comfort her. The other witches stood up and circled her, offering comforting words and urging her not to be afraid. Wendy's suspicions were confirmed. The next day, she took Paper to meet Roland. Despite enduring pain the previous night, Paper remained conscious. Lying in the large bed and surrounded by the witches who came to visit, she listened to their comforting words and felt an overwhelming urge to cry. Roland looked at the young girl with joy, welcoming her as a member of the Witches' Union. Roland examined the experimental notes left by the Exploration Society. To him, this was an entirely new world. Roland was planning to build a mage tower for Agatha, allowing her to continue doing her research. This time, he waited until Agatha had finished her day of acid-making work before calling her to his office. Agatha declined the offer, feeling that a chemistry laboratory like Kyle's was sufficient. That would be so out of style. Roland exclaimed internally. He set aside the draft sketch, then recounted his ideas from the morning, asking Agatha if she could complete the rune crafting on her own. Agatha shook her head in response. Suddenly, Roland turned to Nightingale, inquiring about her combat strength test. Nightingale turned away, stating it was a secret. Roland surmised that she was probably disheartened by Anna. Agatha was somewhat displeased that Roland placed something as valuable as the divine seal in the hall. Nightingale remarked, if the witches from the Federation saw this, they'd be so outraged by Roland that they'd come back to life. Yet, Roland thought to himself that those items weren't that precious at all. They were equivalent to just over 10 kilograms of TNT. Agatha commented that although the rune was a product linked to the magic stone, the materials guiding the magic power were extremely intricate. The most crucial ingredient was the demon's blood. After countless experiments, they discovered that the blood of witches, demons, and demonic beasts differed vastly. Fresh witch bloods can be used to create God punishment soldier. Agatha looked disheartened. This was the Exploration Society's top secret. After the experiments began, she left the society. Initially, the Exploration Society combined the blood of elderly witches with the stone of God's punishment, then infused it into ordinary people. This required more than half of the witch's blood, and it had to come from the same individual. This meant that each transformation resulted in the death of a witch. Many ordinary people also couldn't withstand the procedure and eventually died. The success chance were also very low. According to Tilly's intelligence, the church now had a large number of God's punishment soldiers. Roland was livid. He knew that the church couldn't possibly have found that many elderly witches. They captured witches, raised them, and in the end, drained them of their blood to create God's punishment army. Thousands of witches, each possessing unique powers, were mercilessly killed by the church. They were branded as fallen, despised, and shunned by the world. Nightingale might have sensed Roland's rage. Roland took a deep breath and pronounced, word by word, he will stop them. After Wendy took her bath, she was taken aback when she opened her bedroom door. To her astonishment, Nightingale was sitting at the desk, flipping through the book given out by His Highness to teach the witches in Witch Union. Wendy's towel almost slipped off in surprise. She thought Nightingale had an argument or a fight with the prince. Nightingale clarified that she hadn't. After listening to Agatha's words in the office, Roland feared that Nightingale intended to take on the church alone. Roland knew that within the church there must be many witches loyal to them, some of whom were exceptionally powerful. Nightingale told him to relax. She knew that going to war with the church, they need to rely on the firepower of their powerful army, was the most prudent approach. Roland reassured her that he would defeat the church, and Nightingale had every confidence in him. Nightingale exhaled deeply, recounting the experiments on God's punishment army as Agatha had described. She felt the need to become even stronger, to contribute more to the impending battle against the church. Wendy agreed with Nightingale's sentiment, thinking that perhaps the comfort of the castle had made her complacent. She suddenly realized that enemies were still near, whether it be the church or the demons. And the threat wasn't entirely gone. Yet she hadn't made much progress in a long time. Compared to those sisters who studied hard, like Rem, Hummingbird, and Echo, she seemed to have been too relaxed. Despite being the older witch, she couldn't even light up 2 magic stones. At this rate, she felt she wouldn't be deserving of standing before them as an elderly sister. Wendy took a deep breath, deciding that starting from today, like the other witches, she would spend an hour every night studying the prince's knowledge before going to sleep. After changing into her pajamas, she noticed Nightingale had already dozed off over the desk, lost in dreams.